This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are stemmed. Stay with us. Welcome to this program, Dr. Bruce.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, Dr. Bruce Corrie is a professor of economics in Concordia University. Currently, he is an associate vice president of government and community relations at Concordia University. Dr. Bruce is a leading Twin Cities-based economist, business expert, cultural entrepreneur, and long-time member of Concordia University. His research works are wide-ranging. Among others, the research he conducted on the economic impact of immigrants and minority communities have had powerful impact by shaping views, providing alternative perspectives, and thereby influencing policy issues. Once again, welcome, Dr. Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start from some of the issues that are related to elections in this country, particularly in Minnesota, and I guess you have conducted the landmark candidate survey in this election. Share us at least what was it and how did you conduct that survey?
Yeah, well, once again, it's great to be here with the Romeo 11 and to talk with you, Dr. Hussain. And one of the important things that to celebrate today is that the people of the U.S. and the people of Minnesota have elevated the spirit of democracy, the spirit of freedom, openness, and that's crossing political party lines. And it's that American spirit that's come alive, which is so powerful and something to be joyous about. And I'm not surprised because before the election, we, the Alana Brain Trust, Alana stands for African, Latino, Asian, Native American communities. And so we did a candidate survey that we sent an email out to about more than 300 candidates across Minnesota, across these different statewide offices. And we asked them basically a few questions. And the questions was would you celebrate the value of the Alana communities in your district? Will you work with those communities and champion areas for closing the disparity gap? Will you be accessible and open to your Alana constituents? And will you work with us in solutions? And all of them who responded, so we got a response by over 75, 76 candidates. Oh. Across Minnesota, over 40 cities in greater Minnesota and the metro area, suburban area. That was so great to see that all across Minnesota you had these people who said yes. And so in some ways it was reflective of the election because those voices emerged as leaders now, and out of that group of 76, more than 40 with an over 26 legislative district, that is House, Senate, in Minnesota, have been elected. So there's a good base of people to begin to talk about the future and what can we do together.
That's great. So at the end of the day, where would you want to take this momentum after the election then?
I think now the opportunity lies itself. We have people who are willing to do good things. How could we help work together, support their work, offer ideas in which we can build, say, business development and workforce development and housing and education? Because all those areas, they said, these are some areas that we are interested in working. So we're going to outreach to them, we're going to talk to them and see how we can work together in this current legislative session to achieve some important progress.
Great, thanks so much. And how should the communities you have indicated strategically address, you see, the needs to close, for instance,
Yeah.
racial disparity gaps and build wealth in this state. Do you have something to say over there?
One of the messages of the survey was these legislators said that they would be willing to be accessible to their constituents. So we want to encourage people to reach out to these leaders because they're going to be helping, they're going to be open to them. And I think that's a big deal because some of these areas where these legislators are very important centers of economic, the ethnic economy is very strong in those areas. And so we will encourage people to reach out to them because they're also interested in that voice and to do something.
Thank you. This is about election, and let's dive into some of your researches, particularly in relation to African immigrants. And I've gone through one of your publications, that is the economic potential of African migrants in Minnesota, immigrants in Minnesota. That was published in 2015. What was the objective of that research, and would you mind telling us a bit?
So one of the reasons I was involved with this political work during the election was I was part of a group that petitioned the judicial panel that was going to draw these new legislative districts that are currently in place. And we petitioned that this Alana economy, the African, Latino, Asian, Native American economy, is a huge $1.4 trillion economy, bigger than the economy of Mexico. And they are all across Minnesota, these ethnic economies. How do we get the best representation of those economic interests? Mm-hmm. So they heard us. There was these districts that allow then people to be elected. Currently in the legislature, we have one of the most diverse legislators. But the fact that they could be elected was these districts were drawn in ways that helped some of these candidates get the right coalitions to win. So part of this research is also focusing on the African immigrant communities in Minnesota. And in 2015, with Dr. Jean Gelgalou of African Economic Development Solution, with funding from the McKnight Foundation, we did one of the most extensive studies of African immigrants in Minnesota. And I haven't seen anything else of the magnitude because we had surveys of over 500 people from all the diverse communities of Minnesota, and we could do it only because we had this network that participated in it. So putting that information together, and very recently I updated the study, the African immigrant economy is an estimated 2.8 billion. 2.8 billion is a huge amount. Mm-hmm. And what it says is that it's a very powerful engine of economic growth, and within that economy are even the workforce, the African immigrant workforce. There are people who are working in healthcare, for instance, in manufacturing, in education, all these different areas, science and technology and media like this one, where you have them contributing in critical sectors of the economy. These African immigrants spend money and in all these Targets and Walmart and Best Buy and Delta Airways and insurance, all these mainstream businesses, they spend about $1.8 billion annually. So they are fueling the economic growth in these mainstream sectors. At the same time, just the ethnic economy. So if you go down to Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center, for instance, or Cedar Riverside in Minneapolis, you'll see all these many African immigrant businesses, the cultural malls like Carmel Mall, or recently I went to Brooklyn Park with Acer and saw some of these office buildings, but full of African immigrant businesses. So this ethnic economy itself is over $500 million. That's
Wow.
an estimate of just the African. So you can see that even within the African immigrant, this unique ethnic economy is quite large. It's quite vibrant, and I'm not including some of the global networks like trade and so on. So this potential is huge. It needs to be tapped into, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
I think that's a great contribution. A little bit for more understanding, can you tell us the research method used and perhaps who participated in it?
So the research method was we had one of the principles that Dr. Jean Galgalo and me, as we began the research, we had a principle that the community should benefit from what we do. Usually when we do research, all the benefit goes to the researcher.
Mm-hmm.
So I come, I ask you questions, I take it, I publish my paper, I get thing, but what happens to you? How did it benefit you? So we said we want to change that. We want to make sure that the research benefits the community. So everybody who took a survey with us, we gave them $10 for their time.
Okay.
And everybody who helped us administer the survey, we gave them $10 each survey. We also offered small grants to organizations, community organizations that helped us do the survey in their organization. And because we had this participation as well as the networks, we had a wide, diverse range from Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, Romeo, Somali, Nigerian. I mean, all the different African immigrant groups can be seen reflected in our survey. So it's one of the most comprehensive, diverse surveys. So we got these 500 plus surveys. We also surveyed 100 businesses about what's their business, have they accessed resources, what are their needs. And so from those 500 surveys, I projected for the larger population what would be. Yes. So from this survey, for instance, we got the average spending on groceries and healthcare and transportation. Mm-hmm. So I used those numbers to project the statewide numbers. So it gave us a better, rather than us just saying, right now, if you were to go and look for consumer spending in African immigrants, you can't find it. Because the national study includes everybody together in one, so they share black consumption expenditure, but you don't know whether they are native born or traditional African Americans or African immigrants. And it's very important to separate those data because each one is a very unique segment. What applies to one may not necessarily apply to another. And so we've got to, that's why the value of our study is that there's not a whole lot of information available about this particular market. And so we made those projections, and lately, because we did in 2015, projecting it to 2022 with the latest population data, what's the current estimate. So that's where the latest numbers are there. So it was a study of based on active community participation.
That's very broad, and the contribution seems very huge. And as a person who involved in that research, how do you describe then overall the contribution of African immigrants, and perhaps what is the implication of that for policymakers?
Yeah, so I also have done something else. I've used an economic model to study, say, the impact of African immigrant workers on the economy, and what all of this information can help. It can help policymakers first see African immigrants tend to be invisible. People don't see them fully because they also tend to be scattered in place. There are pockets in, say, West Metro or in Minneapolis, but you have the populations all across Minnesota. And so for policymakers first to acknowledge this huge economic potential and then to develop policies. So, for example, we asked the question to businesses, have you benefited from these different government programs or nonprofit or chambers of commerce? And they said no. The people that they seemed to have the most contact was the licensing department. Because if they're doing a business,
Yes.
that's the only person that they had contact. But so it shows that there was an access. We also found out that female entrepreneurship is very strong in the African immigrant communities, and you can see it when you go to the malls. You'll find a lot of African female entrepreneurs, but nobody's serving that unique market. Like what are their particular needs that could be different from men, male entrepreneurs, and what kind of access to capital, to technical assistance. There's lacking in for female entrepreneurs, yet they are very much more entrepreneurial than males. You could see kind of in even when you go to the malls, but also it came out in that data that we are showing. So the data pointed to first the existence of the market as well as unique needs of African immigrants that required unique strategies that need policy attention. And to date, I haven't seen that policy attention that's given by policymakers to this market. They're not intentionally looking at these segments and doing things that might work. And I hope it will change in this cycle on, and that we'll have some. So we have some good nonprofits that are, say, in economic development, like AEDS, ADC, ACER, all of these groups that are doing in business development, community development. Their capacity needs to be increased. So when COVID hit, for example, all these communities were devastated, but you could see that African immigrants tended to access some of these resources, and it was primarily because of these nonprofits that were doing the good work. And if they weren't there, these entrepreneurs would not have access to those resources. So I think that's another. We also asked in the survey about this unique concept called Little Africa. So Little Africa is a concept developed by Dr. Jean Galgaloo of AEDS rooted in St. Paul in an area around Snelling. And the idea was to, because African immigrants are spread out, maybe we create a physical presence, but also a virtual network. And so to market and to brand and to bring alive that community, this concept of Little Africa emerged. So we asked our participants, so do you like the concept of Little Africa, the survey, and would you support it? And all of them overwhelmingly were in favor of that. And we could see the impact of that, say, in Little Africa Fest that has happened annually, where so many people come there. But there you could see the potential of this community as well as the market.
Thanks so much. We'll be talking about Little Africa a little bit later on. But as I go through that material, that article, I saw two recommendations, and I would like to get reflections on that from your side. It says, among other recommendations, incorporating the economic potential African immigrants community into the larger economy, it says, was one of the suggestions. What is the sense of that?
See, as I mentioned, is that one size doesn't fit all,
Yep.
right? So if you go with the intention that we have a government program, and everyone can access it, it won't work. The reason why some of these nonprofits like AEDS and ADC and ACER are successful is because they offer language-specific technical assistance, outreach, right? So outreach in Somali and Oromo and Ethiopian languages and culturally specific to the Liberians or the Nigerians, and this way they can reach and access them more effectively. So a big policy recommendation is don't look at all of them in one lens, but be cultural intelligence, and so that you can reach them more effectively. The second implication is that don't ignore this market. It's big. It's huge. $2.8 billion is not a small amount of money. That's a huge section. And if you're talking about rural areas, small towns, as well as big cities like St. Paul and Minneapolis, even then it's pretty a significant engine of economic growth. And then when we talk about the workers, I once did a survey, a simulation. What if all the Liberian workers in the healthcare industry suddenly disappeared? That healthcare system, especially the senior care, will collapse. We'll be in serious trouble. So people don't realize that these workers are playing such a critical role in those economies, and we need to do something about it to nurture them to grow, because they are working very hard. And for example, during COVID, they were on the front line of the response. So how much of benefit of all these stimulus payments and reached our nursing and home health care and other kinds of healthcare workers? It's a big question. And so then how could we kind of pay attention to that and bring more policy attention to that?
Thank you. Maybe the other recommendation you have suggested that organizing and developing alternative loan pools. What is the meaning of that again?
So 2 areas about alternative finance. One is around just the regular capital that is flowing. Like, I'll give you an example. I am just one person, right? We have all these organizations like DEED and the banks and all the nonprofits. During COVID, when that purchasing power parity program first came out, the SBA loan program, none of our communities could benefit it. So we began through the Alana Brain Trust, we began advocacy, reaching out to the Small Business Administration. And then one day the SBA said for 3 hours, there's a window that can be opened for only small business. And so we called different people, and all the nonprofits were very active, and that's the time a number of our communities got benefit. So the second round of the SBA, I developed a partnership with 12 banks, and I sent out emails to people who wants a loan, connect with me, and then I connected them to the banks around the place, and I followed up.
Right.
Because see, the interesting part about this is very often you send in an application, but then you don't know what's happening. So when people send in the application, they told me that they sent it to X bank. So then I would call that banker and say, did you get that? And they'll say, okay, yes, and this is what we're doing. Or the banker would tell me, hey, this person sent me something and I'm trying to reach him, but they're not responding. So then I would call the guy and say, hey, or person and say, hey, listen, respond to them. You want the resource or not? And so you need that active engagement in our communities for various reasons, whether it's language or culture. So as a result, even in my, through that network, about 50 applicants came in, was funneled through these organizations. And today I meet people who tell me, hey, remember you assisted in helping to get this resource. Wow. And so, and I met one entrepreneur like that. He's very successful now, but he remembers during COVID, they were trying to access resources and they couldn't get access to it. So you need that active engagement. You need policymakers. A lot of people like to sit behind a desk and send emails.
Yeah.
It's called boots on the ground strategy. You got to go and knock on the door and sit down with someone, help them with the application. Otherwise, they think that that's not for them, or they think I can't get it because maybe they're used to in their home countries having great difficulty finding things that they would say, hey, I don't have the political connections, I don't have this, so that's not for me, and then they don't apply. So I think one of the biggest success stories of COVID and the pandemic was the African immigrant nonprofits, like the ones I mentioned, like ADC especially. A lot of business immigrants kind of funneled through them, and they got some resources, and that's, I think, something to celebrate. The community should celebrate those organizations because they played a very important role in a very critical time. And then the policymakers should invest in them. I don't see investment in their capacity as much as needed.
Yeah.
And that has to change.
That's really a great professional commitment from your side. Thank you for supporting the immigrants. And finally, I would like to ask you about Little Africa. What is it? Tell us a bit about objective and how they work, and perhaps your relationship with them.
So the history of Little Africa was when this light rail was going to come through St. Paul. The local community in what is called the Rondo neighborhood. It's an African-American community in St. Paul. When they built the freeway in 1964, they built it right through this African-American community, and that was the economic powerhouse of the African-American community, and this was coming out of the civil rights movement, where segregation was there. They couldn't go into certain sections of the town. They couldn't buy houses. But in this section, their businesses were located. They had a strong middle class community. They had their own businesses. And so while they were deciding where to build the freeway, they decided to cut this community in half, which destroyed that economy. And it still hasn't recovered from that time because a lot of people were displaced. I know it because I had a friend, she adopted me as a grandson. Her name was Grandma Wilson.
Okay.
And she would tell me the story about how all this displacement occurred. So when light rail was coming, a group of us got together and said, let's make sure that this does not happen again here. So we came up with a concept called the World Cultural Heritage District. That is, when you come to St. Paul, you'll have the cultures of the world, African, African-American, Latino, Asian, Native American, because all those communities were there in that. So from that vision, leaders developed concepts. So Waminto from the Asian community came up with Little Mekong. And Jean Gelgaloo, Dr. Jean, came up with Little Africa. And so what were these concepts? It's a very new strategy of economic development where the cultural assets of people fuel their own wealth building. You see, one of the foundations of racism is you deny people's value. Because if you deny your value as worthless, then you can exploit you. You can do whatever you want. So historically, racism denied the value of people and denied the culture of people. So if you go to the museums and if you go to these institutions, you'll not find diverse cultures represented in it because that was the strategy of denial. Little Africa flips that on the head. It says that value that you rejected is actually the foundation of our well-building. Sure. We're going to celebrate African values, African food, African music. And so
I was invited there, and there was
Little Africa Fest. Yes. So you could see that how vibrant it was with the drums and the music. And so people are empowered because they are celebrating themselves. At the same time, people like me who came there, I enjoyed it so much because I enjoyed seeing the music and the dance and the food and the fashion. I got a big benefit out of it, experiencing Africa and African culture. So it helped both ways. It helped the entrepreneur build wealth, and it helped me experience Africa. So it's a win-win situation for both. And that's the secret of Little Africa. As this Little Africa emerged, new businesses want to locate there and benefit from the visibility. They have murals and events like Little Africa Fest. So it's something again to be to celebrate in Minnesota.
Thanks so much, and I'm really lucky. I've got a chance to talk to you a number of times, and usually I hear from you talking about diversity, equality, inclusion, and justice. Would you mind touching upon that slightly, and we'll end here our discussion?
If I hear you correctly, you're saying
diversity
about diversity and inclusion, and I think the key insight about diversity and inclusion is what I touched on right now. Our human family is so beautiful because we are all different. And because we are different, we see things differently. And in an ordinary business of life, if I want to make a different design or a different cup, having diverse people look at that, we'll come up with some new things. And I think that is the potential of a diverse, encouraging diversity, is you bring in new ways of looking at a problem. You help change your own way of thinking because you think that this is what it is, but you can like, for example, you're driving, and often happens with me, the GPS finds a way I never really thought of.
Yeah.
And so when we have so the first thing is that this can create innovation and creativity, but also it is untapped because it has been ignored so long. When you bring it in, it can leverage growth and cause an explosion of wealth building and community building. And then it helps us to develop our cultural intelligence so that we can better relate to each other. And so I think having, I like to use the word instead of DEI more like a cultural intelligence framework, that with cultural intelligence for ourselves and in the communities that we have, we'll be much better off because we can learn and we can look at the world in different ways, and we can benefit of the different things that and different ways that people do things. And Minnesota and the U.S. can be much better off as a result of that.
Great. It's really an honor to have you here. If you have some final remark or remarks, I'm going to give you a split of second. So anything to say finally?
Well, first of all, I enjoy being here with you and hearing your own story of coming here and the wealth. You're an example of the talent that come to America to make America better. And so having this conversation with you and learning about from you, but also being part of this Romeo 11 studio that is also changing, helping to change what we know as media. What is media and who does media serve, right? So people who, so I'm very excited about being part of Romeo 11 too, and the message on the world, and I look forward to kind of working together in the future and around these areas. And
thanks so much. With this, we conclude our discussion today with Dr. Bruce. And for those of you who would like to share your vision, hopes, and professional critics, the door is open. Please contact me through my Facebook. My name is Hussein Kadir. See you next time. Dr. Bruce, profoundly thanks so much.
Thank you.
This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are stemmed. Stay with us.